Good evening, welcome back to the channel, and it is time for another book review video. So, what are we going to tackle tonight? Well, if you paid attention to the last video, or even watched the last video at all, then you're probably aware that Dungeon Crawler Carl is on the menu. So, just to go ahead and cut off the tension, absolutely a highly recommended book. But let's dive into what Dungeon Crawler Carl is. Okay, so have you ever wondered what it would be like if life were more like a video game? Well, that seems to be something that Matt Dinniman was pondering when he made this. Now, whether or not it actually was, I don't know. Could just be that he was a really big D&D fan, and he was curious what it would be like if you applied D&D rules to real life as well. Now, I keep seeing Dungeon Crawler Carl pop up with reference to the humor in it. I've mentioned in my review of The Blade itself that I was planning on alternating Joe Abercrombie's books with Dinniman's books because I figured Dinniman's books would be a little bit more lighthearted. I should clarify what I mean there. I understand that this is still technically a post-apocalyptic book, and there's some really serious things to it, but there's also some really good dark humor laced into it. So this is more of a black humor type of thing than it is a straight-up humorous book, because you have to keep in mind, within just the first couple pages of the book, the number of humans gets dropped from several billion to just a couple million. And that's about all I'm going to mention at the rate of extinction that humans go at. But, how did I hear about this? Well, I am basically terminally online when I'm not helping take care of my kids. Sometimes probably a little bit too much even when I am taking care of my kids. And so, if you're online a lot, you're going to come across Dungeon Crawler Carl, especially if you're in the video game space and all that sort of stuff. You'll at least see it mentioned. So, this has just been popping off over the last several years. This whole series has become mega popular. This is the first book of 8. I believe the 8th one has either come out at this point, or it's coming out within the next couple days of me recording this, or it came out just a couple days before I recorded this. Either way, there's 8 books in this, and it just seems like it continues to get more popular from year to year. Dinniman does have other series, and to be honest, I don't know anything about those other series. This is the only one that I've really heard anything about. I didn't know he had other series until I was looking into his background a little bit for this book. If you actually want to know a little bit about Dinniman himself, let's just read his review here at the back. Matt Dinniman is a writer, artist, and musician. Well, he's a bass player. I feel that. My bass is sitting right over there, and that was the first stringed instrument that I bought. From Gig Harbor, Washington. He is the author of several books, including the best-selling Dungeon Crawler Carl series. So, short, straight to the point. Now, how would I describe Dungeon Crawler Carl? This book is, if you basically had Google or Meta lenses just burned into your eyes, and everywhere you looked it was just giving you a heads-up display from an RPG, but specifically an action RPG, because obviously this is not going to be turn-based, or at least it's not yet. I would imagine that could be one of the twists for one of the books, but we'll see. The book, more or less what happens, and this happens very quickly in the beginning, so minor spoilers. Aliens come to take possession of Earth because through some really scummy corporate loopholes, they manage to gain possession of the materials of Earth because Earth doesn't claim it for itself. And so what they end up doing is basically all structures just get taken in an instant. And that pretty much terminates everyone that's inside of any sort of structure at the moment that happens. Part of the deal for them taking it, though, is they have to host a reality TV series where there's a dungeon, and I'm not certain how many levels there's supposed to be to the dungeon. But if you can get through all the levels of the dungeon, then that person is allowed to reclaim the materials that were taken. Now, the thing is, if you don't enter the dungeon, then they reclaim your materials as is, which, in other words, any people left on the surface that don't go into the dungeon just die. So, you didn't really have a choice, and our titular character, through an interesting series of events that's kind of funny and I'm not going to go into, he ends out outside when this happens, and he and his ex-girlfriend's cat end up going into the dungeon. And as silly as it sounds for the cat very quickly becomes a very central and important and likable character. So this is a man and his cat working his way through a dungeon where he can actually gain experience, gain equipable items, and all the fun things that you would normally think of with a RPG, be it a tabletop RPG or a video game version of an RPG. And it is a fantastic ride. It's a good page turner. You go quickly from chapter to chapter. You don't really want to stop. I was able to convince my wife to read the first chapter of it, and she's actually interested in it now herself. And this is not normally her type of genre. So the writing is solid. The story is entertaining. It's simple, and that is actually something I really enjoy sometimes. People get a little bit too lost in really good prose and really tightly wound together literature. And don't get me wrong, I can appreciate that too. The book that I'm reading right now is actually, I think, one of the best examples of well-written literature that I've come across in a long time. So I'm not going to spoil which book that is just yet, but we'll definitely have a video on that one soon. As a matter of fact, it's been bumped up, so it's probably going to be the next one I do after this. But sometimes it's fun just to read something a little bit more straightforward. And this is not to say that this is simplistic or that the story doesn't lack complexity or anything like that. It actually has a decent bit of complexity and twists and ideas to it. It is interesting. It's unique. It's just simple to pick up and simple to follow along with. And that's what I was looking for with alternating with The Blade itself, because it's not necessarily the simplest book. The Blade itself's not that confusing, but there's a lot going on. This is pretty much a straightforward tale of survival, and I think it is pretty well summed up in the text that's actually emblazoned on the cover of the hardcover when you remove the dust cover. You will not break me. That's the sort of mentality that goes into this, that it's not so much that he's this hyper-complex person as it is that he has a goal, and his goal is mainly to not let the aliens win. And it's interesting to see how he goes about it. He's not stupid, but it's an easy read, and that is what I'm really enjoying about it. It's what I was looking for as something to alternate a more dense book with, and I can see why it has a very cult-like following. As a matter of fact, I would say Matt Dinniman at this point is almost a cult leader. Not really, that's a joke. Actually, one moment of something that I would like to mention about Dinniman. I saw a post of his because I follow his group on Facebook, and he actually mentioned directly from a post of his own. He's like, look, it's not that hard to tell what my politics are, but in the online spaces that are mine, that are for discussing my book, I would appreciate keeping politics out of it and just focusing on the books. And his point ultimately being that he wanted to have a space where people that even the ones he disagrees with could come and actually bond with people on the opposite side over something that they mutually enjoy, hoping that that dialogue and discourse will actually sort of bring people back towards seeing each other as human and maybe understanding why they're on different sides of the political spectrum. And while I get some of the arguments towards people saying, you know, you really, if you were on this side or this side, we're diametrically opposed. I can see that under certain circumstances, under certain issues, but I also see the value in trying to bring people back together for a dialogue. And I can really appreciate that while he does not hide his politics, if you look at his stuff, it is not that hard to figure out. And if you pay any close attention at all to the just general setup for this book, it shouldn't be that hard to figure out where he lands. He wants his stories to be something that reaches everyone. In other words, he's wanting to deliver his thoughts and his ideas to a wide variety of people and try to foster getting back to a more civil sort of discourse. And I can appreciate that. There's a lot of tension in the world anymore, and one of the things we seem to be forgetting how to do is to talk to each other in a civil manner. We've gotten too used to painting each other as an enemy. I'm probably going to cut most of this out because I don't want to get super heavily political on here. Let me just go ahead and say I'll cut that portion out, but I want to put this part in. That's about all I'm going to comment on that space. I agree with him in sentiment that it's good to create a space where people with opposing views can come together and have dialogue over something that they mutually enjoy. And I do think that that can be a key to creating bridges in the future and helping us avoid worse versions of conflict than just discussion. So I can truly appreciate that, and it actually gave me a bit of respect for him as an author, even outside of just the quality of his work. But the quality of his work is excellent. It stands on its own. And it would be interesting if Dungeon Crawler Carl ended up being one of the keys to bridging some of the gaps in society that have started to form. It'd be kind of ironic that nerd culture came through to save at that point, but I don't think that's realistically what's going to happen. However, it's a nice thought. So, Dungeon Crawler Carl, highly recommend. If you have the time, and it doesn't take much time to dig through it, this is a pretty big book. It's 400 and some odd pages. There's a bonus sort of story at the end, so I can't remember exactly how long the first one is. Pick up the first one. From what I understand, every book more or less takes place on one level of the dungeon. So you find out that floor's gimmick, and you run through that floor. It's excellent. There's a good amount of subplot to it, but it's really straightforward and easy to follow. Highly recommend. Very enjoyable, and you have plenty to dig into. So if you've been looking for a long fantasy series, sci-fi series, this sort of lives on that border between the two. To read, this is it for you. And remember, I don't have a catchphrase for this channel yet, so have a good night.